Okay. Hey, everybody, this is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books. I'm so thrilled to have all of you here joining us for our virtual author series, which we have been doing since 1997, it feels like. No, actually since April, but we've been doing about 2 to 3 events a week, believe it or not. And I think we've gone well over 50, 60 since we've begun. And it's been really great to stay connected with all of you in this strange, weird world that we're living in, and still give you something to put on your calendar that's something to look forward to, something where you can expect a nice mix of escapism, where we can maybe laugh some, but also moments where we can look at the issues in our community and in our country and in our world that are more sobering and something that we need to shed a little bit of light on, much like we'll be talking about tonight. And so kind of having a really nice variety. We're going to be keeping on that track for a while. And I would say, just to be candid, we're probably not going to be doing any in-person events. Gosh, spring 2021, who knows? It might be a little while, unfortunately, but we need to be pragmatic about that. But we're going to keep doing this. And even into the rest of this month and into November, we have a pretty wide variety of stuff. We have everything from a wonderful conversation with Layla Lalami and Roxanne Gay coming up on the 12th of this month, to Matthew McConaughey at the end of the month, and kind of everything else in between. That's a pretty wide range of topics and styles there. So check out our website, magiccitybooks.com, and you can see what's coming up. And if you buy your books through us, we're owned and operated by the nonprofit Tulsa Literary Coalition. So when you buy a book, like Michelle's book tonight or Alicia's book tonight, you're not just supporting great authors, you're putting that money right back into your community and making it possible for us to keep doing the work that we're doing. So thank you very much for that. There's so few ways to describe the gut punch feeling that you get when you read a book like what Michelle Bowdler has done. And when you find out that this is Michelle's debut, you kind of would imagine this would be like her 8th or 12th or 13th book, because of the confidence and the style that she brings to the book. And it's not an easy book. And you might think that this book, at first glance, might be something that in a moment like this in this world that you may not want to kind of lean into, but it runs the gamut of emotions. There are moments of pure despair. There are moments of victory. There are moments of hope, and much like life itself, especially right now, we are kind of this rainbow of emotion, and you will get that when you read Is Rape a Crime? I've always been pleased to, when I don't have to actually do these events myself and actually can sit back and enjoy it and watch and listen, just like all of you. And tonight we have a very special guest moderator, Alysia Abbott, who I will say wrote a wonderful memoir. Gosh, what year did Fairyland come out? 2014, I want to say 2013, about a very, it's understatement to say understatement youth in 1970s San Francisco, and I would encourage you to get it. I believe we have it at the store. And even better than that, we have links in our chat tonight, and you can get both of these books. We're doing a very special price tonight, 2 for the price of 2. That's one night only, and tell your friends about that. So we're going to have a great conversation tonight. So Alicia will be kind of moderating and talking with Michelle. As I mentioned, you can get the books in the chat there. We also want your questions. So if you have some, please put those into the Q&A here. We'll get to as many of those as we can. If you're watching on Facebook, you can post those and we'll pull those into this conversation as well. I do want to say one more thing, which is when we booked this event, one thing had not happened yet that has some big news, which is Michelle has been longlisted for the National Book Award for nonfiction for Is Rape a Crime, which is quite an amazing feat. And I think, I'd put my money on her getting on the short list as well. So I'm really excited about that. So I want to say a big welcome to Alicia and Michelle. You guys take it from here, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Magic City Books. I don't know what we would do without our independent bookstores over the course of this time. They are the lifeblood of the community, and I'm just so excited that one of the side effects of having everything on Zoom is that we can attend books and book events in Arkansas or California or wherever. So what a pleasure it is to be here with you, Michelle. Some of you in the audience might know that Michelle is a graduate of the Memoir Incubator program in Boston. It's a program where I teach, but while I've never had the pleasure of working directly with Michelle, she left before I began, I've long admired her writing and her community work. And I'm so grateful for the honor of interviewing her tonight, the first event after her book being longlisted for the National Book Award, which is just incredible. Is Rape a Crime is a powerful and urgent book. I urge you all to read it if you haven't already, and there is a link where you can buy it. So before we begin, Michelle, there are people in the audience who haven't read the book, and I just wonder if you might sort of describe what happened, the event that's at the center of the story.
Sure. Thank you, Alicia. And I just wanted to say thank you to Magic City Books and how excited I am to be here with you, Alicia, and how much I want to endorse Fairyland. Is just a beautiful, wonderful memoir. So just wanted to say that because I'm a fan as well as a friend. So I wanted to make sure people knew that. So the book that I've written really, it is divided up into three parts. It is called a memoir, an investigation, and a manifesto. But really, the event that, and the event that led to really my life being changed, I think, forever, and then, many years later, allowed me to write this book, was to just set the stage that there was a series of home invasions in Boston in the mid-1980s. And they were so prolonged and so concerning that the Boston Sexual Assault Unit was formed as a result. And actually, that wasn't a fact I knew until probably 25 years later.
Incredible.
And yeah, it's incredible. And so I was the victim of a home invasion in Boston, and it was, front page news, and it was on the on the TV news as well, because it had been, I think, the seventh of a series of attacks, and people were getting really scared in Boston, and they didn't really know what to do. And then 3 days, I think, after my assault, they announced that the Boston Sexual Assault Unit, which still exists today, was going to be formed. And the theory behind the unit was that crimes that were happening in, for those of you who are from, think about your own boroughs and where you live. In our case, it was, if there was a case in Alston or Brookline, literally within blocks of one another, different police officers would investigate those. And there was clearly perhaps a connection to these different rapes. And so my story was that I met with the police once and then never heard from them again. And later in my life, when I still felt like I was so impacted by what had happened to me, despite the fact that my life had gone on to really be wonderful. I have a wife and a family and a great job, and I finally went to graduate school at Harvard, and things really were wonderful for me. I still felt like there was something unfinished. And I began to investigate more about my own case when I learned that that the state crime lab had thousands of DNA samples that had been untested going back to the 1980s. And I wondered if my rape evidence was sitting, and that was why I had never heard anything. And I also became involved in advocacy work as a result. And so the book takes you through not only my own story, but also what I learned while doing advocacy work. And really, the book is filled with research as well about sort of where sex crimes sit in terms of how they're addressed differently than all other felony crimes. So that's a quick summary.
Thank you, Michelle. You've worked on behalf of survivors of rape for more than a decade. You've spoken in Washington, D.C. and met other rape survivors, yet you've been open about your disdain for the word survivor. Yeah. And I wonder if you could tell us why.
Yeah, and I guess what I would say is I just want to say that if somebody else wants to call themselves that, I wouldn't say, oh, that I don't like that. But for me, I feel like survivor is a word that people sort of put on someone as a badge that they haven't told you that they want or that they've earned. Like, you know, it's done a lot with people as well with illnesses. Like, you're a survivor, and somehow that's supposed to mean that you're brave and you're strong. And really, a lot of us just wish this thing never happened to us. And we don't want to be called brave and courageous and amazing. We want to just be people who maybe wish that, you know, we weren't known by this thing. It's funny because I've written a book about it, so now I will be known by this thing. But also, survivor implies that the work is on me, and right?
Yeah.
And so I really feel like if you use victim, you're saying that this is a crime, this is an act of violence that is serious and weighty, that we all need to be paying attention to do something about and change, given the vast numbers of people who are impacted by rape and sexual assault.
Thank you. I just want to remind people that if you have any questions for Michelle along the way, you can put those questions in the Q&A, and I will ask them during the talk and after the talk both. So one of the things that your memoir really powerfully shows is how even reporting incidents of rape can often do the victim more harm than good. In some ways, the way you show it, it's almost re-traumatizing, as is the wait for an idea of justice. Like, I was really shocked to learn in your book that some victims of rape have turned to crowdfunding to get their cases investigated, or only see results after suing their police departments. And I was wondering if you could sort of comment on this, both your personal experience and how this plays out more widely.
Yeah, so the data shows that probably, you know, it's hard to know when something isn't reported, how you can estimate the numbers, but the estimates that are done by a compilation of federal data, the Crime Bureau statistics, is that about a quarter of rapes are reported. And some of that, unfortunately, is due to the fact that a lot of people are victimized as children. And the other issue is that people may not feel like they can report because the person who's responsible is the breadwinner, is known in their community, has said that their family will be harmed in some way. And so not reporting is not always related to distrust of law enforcement. However, it is also true that when somebody is vulnerable and scared and has just been through unimaginable violence, and then on top of that, a multi-hour exam, that they're really in a really vulnerable position. And in a lot of what we see, unfortunately, still today, it's not just true in 30 years ago, is that a lot of officers really aren't trained in how to work with sexual assault victims. They also know that the rates of going forward to any sort of court case are very low, and so they may discourage people because, you know, they don't see the point for themselves. They're not going to get a win and a solve necessarily, and they don't understand that there's importance just to listening and trying to help in the situation that has occurred. And it's really problematic. It's also problematic when medical folks or anybody who's responding in the immediate aftermath hasn't had training to because PTSD, which can be a short-term impact of a traumatic event, is exacerbated when people in the aftermath that you're looking to for help not only don't make matters better, but can make them much, much worse.
So actually that leads to a question from one of our audience members, Linda Odom. She said, did you have PTSD? And if so, did you get treated?
Yeah, so I surely did. And, It's funny. That's a whole nother thing that I have I have my own little feelings about that term. So it's called post-traumatic stress disorder, and I like to call it post-traumatic stress because I think it's a normal reaction to a
Absolutely.
to an abnormal event. And
You're not
you
crazy.
know,
What happened to you is crazy.
that's right.
Something your wife Mary said that was
Yeah,
like really
yeah,
important.
yeah, exactly. And so I did. I mean, I felt like my nerves were living outside my skin. I often, sleep was an issue, concentration was an issue. And, I lived in Boston where some of the, I mean, Judith Herman, who wrote Trauma and Recovery, has a victims of violence program in Cambridge that is, internationally known. Some of the best therapists in the country work there. And so I did get some help. And I also, I went to a rape support group, um, and periodically over the years where I felt like I had put it behind me, there would be something that happened that made me feel like I was having the same kinds of body memories that I had at the time, and so I've periodically had to get a little tune up in that way, and it's been really helpful. Yeah.
So Linda Cutting has a question about, after experiencing post-traumatic stress, what pushed you to open things up again by researching what happened to your rape kit? Because that, there's this idea of maybe sometimes the culture says, okay, move on, or trust the police, they're handling it. Though you write about some, very gruff interactions with the police who, a particular officer who says, if we have any updates, we'll get back to you. And so what made you decide to open up the case and find out what happened to your rape kit?
So somewhere along the way, I got a lot older and I got a lot more angry. I mean, I don't seem like I'm angry now, but I got really, really angry. And I read the news. And so I had read this story about this, and I had like a resurgence of PTSD after I had a surgery in the year 2000. And I was working at a college campus where and I do the work that I do is in healthcare and mental health. And so I was hearing about sexual assault constantly. And so I was already feeling like I was deeply impacted again after feeling like I had put it behind me. And it wasn't getting better this time. It was still just with me as if something was unfinished. And so I started reading these articles based on the case in Boston where they found all these untested DNA samples. And everything I read was just horrifying. And it sort of reawakened in me. I mean, I always identified as a feminist and a social justice person, but it was like that person kind of got put aside a little bit when I was just trying to recover. And she sort of started coming back and saying, this isn't okay. And I started asking questions, and rather than having it making me feel worse, and having it feel like this is just, the memories were with me all the time anyway. Yeah. I have to say, I'm just going to do a little aside, Alicia, which is my wife is a nurse. And I remember when we first met, like if somebody's loved one died, I would say, is it okay to say it's been a few months? Is it okay to ask someone how they're doing? And I don't want to bring it up if it's going to make them sad. And she would always say, they're thinking about it anyway. Wow. Like you bringing it up isn't what's making them think about it. So of course you should mention it. And I think that's actually true for a lot of people. Like it didn't make me think about it more. It was on my mind constantly. This actually gave me something to do. So I think that's a great question, Linda, and I'm glad you asked it. But no, it was actually helpful.
Karen Molt asks, how has the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, SAKI grants to cities assisted in solving old sexual assault cases?
Yeah, that is so I have a very mixed relationship with that. And what I would say is that, I'm friends with Debbie Smith, who the 2004 Debbie Smith Act is named after her. And it was so that SAKI money could go to law enforcement and crime labs to try to deal with what people were calling the backlog. And $1 billion has gone into initiatives to deal with untested rape evidence. And on the one hand, that's phenomenal because it means that some people who didn't have answers now have answers. But the problem with that is that it hasn't gotten to why this one felony crime has hundreds of thousands of unexamined evidence. Like, we wouldn't do that with murder. We don't even do that with burglaries. If someone comes to you and says they've had their laptop stolen, the police go and they try to figure out what happened. And yet with this felony crime, there's 12,000 in LA and 12,000 in Memphis and 6,000 in, it's shocking.
Yeah, the idea of someone having a crowdfund to get their case investigated. Can you imagine in a murder case, someone having to do that? It's unfathomable.
No, it's unfathomable.
So one of the aspects of your memoir that I really admired was how skillfully you narrow and then widen the narrative lens, moving from really personal, vulnerable moments to the larger picture, including deeply researched data about the way rape is handled and mishandled in our society. And so, but I understand that when you started this book, it was just personal. How and why did you decide to make it memoir, investigation, and manifesto? Yeah,
so that's a great question. And I will say that I learned about moving that camera around in my memoir class. So kudos to Grub Street. So it was almost all memoir when the book sold.
Wow.
Yeah. So for about 8 months, I was still working full time. I still am. And every weekend and every evening and every vacation, I just researched and researched and researched. And the book was of interest to 2 publishers, and they both got on the phone with me and said, this story is really powerful, but it really begins to tell a story about a larger, what about those rape kits? What about the backlog? What about, and you seem to be pretty knowledgeable about this, and would you be willing to include a little research? Well, 150 research notes later, we had a book, and it took about 6 months. I mean, it's kind of,
it's such a feat. It's so impressive, honestly.
Thank you.
What you pull from. So the rape that you write about took place in Boston in the summer of 1984, over 35 years ago, 36 years ago, right? Yet you've said about the book, I couldn't have written this book 1 second sooner than I did.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you could expand on that. Is that about you being ready to write the story, or is that about like the market, like the audience being ready for this story?
I think it was more, I was referring more to myself. I feel like I found a voice somehow that, while it showed a lot of vulnerability, and that was, and at times despair and disassociation, that so much had happened in my life and in my work that I really, and in this advocacy work, that I felt like I had found my voice, and my voice was steady, and I felt like I had some power, like I had a voice that had some power, that I was ready to share something, and I was ready to write something that I not only couldn't have written sooner, but I didn't have the skills. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was in my late 40s when I picked up my pen again and decided that maybe if I started writing, which is something I had given up on after the assault. I was an English major in college and had a job for a magazine when I was raped, and I just, my life went in a totally different direction, and I thought that was just my old self in a way. Yeah. But it wasn't. And so I started writing again. I was enjoying it, and I felt like I was finding my voice again, but I really didn't know much about writing at all. And so, and I wanted to write a really good book. Like I really wanted it to be meaningful, and I wanted to be proud of it. And so I needed the time and space to do that. And so by the time I started writing seriously in 2016, and now the book has come out in 2020, I needed that time. And let me just, can I just say a shout out too, that, you know, the book was published. Okay, I'm going to just say it. The book was published when I was 59. Okay.
And own it.
Right. And for all those people who like put on Twitter, I haven't written my book yet and I'm 42. Like, don't worry about it. You can, you know, Grub Street just published 4 books, and I was the youngest of the 4. Everyone else was in their 60s and 70s.
And you're longlisted for National Book Award.
Yeah.
Matthew McConaughey hasn't been longlisted for National Book Award. Isabella Wickerson is on that list with you. That's some fine company.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. We have a question from Karen Moltz. Will you speak of the needed collaboration between the hospital, emergency room, when a sexual assault victim enters, and the police department in carrying out the examination, investigation and preservation of evidence, and testing and preservation of rape kit? Do the two work synergistically?
I think, unfortunately, some of that depends on this. So some of these procedures really do vary from state to state. So for example, when it comes to, first of all, sometimes when people go to the hospital, they don't know that they want to report their rape. And so the hospital's job is just to do the exam, make sure that they take care of whatever injuries there are, and treat whatever they can treat, and also not push in any way. Like, don't you want to talk to the police? It's, if the exam is done by a SANE nurse, which is a sexual assault nurse examiner, who's trained to collect forensic evidence, it's more likely that if somebody does want to report the crime and pursue criminal charges, which again does not happen in all cases, you're much better off if a SANE nurse does it. And some states and some rural areas don't have SANE nurses. In fact, I talked to someone recently who said that even before this pandemic, they were doing telesane training in areas where they don't have these nurses, or it takes 7 hours for them to drive from a city into a rural area while somebody is suffering. And so then, so the hospital would keep the evidence, and the person who's considering reporting would have a period of time, depending on the state, after which they could say, yes, I do want to report it, and then it would be transferred to the police in a safe way. I believe usually the police would pick it up, and yeah.
But then after that point, the police picking it up, I mean, that's what I feel your book really investigates. You know, in 2019, the New York Times reported on this tremendous backlog of these rape kits, but you write even the term backlog is misleading because it indicates that they're just behind. Could you sort of clarify that, why that's misleading?
Yeah, because so I wouldn't have really even understood that if I hadn't met these women that I met who had all found out who their rapists were after their kits were tested 10, 15, and 20 years after their assaults. Wow. And several of them reported their crimes. And this was, you know, the DNA evidence wasn't in a national database until the late 90s. So it wouldn't have necessarily been as helpful in solving my crime until 10 or 15 years later.
Technology changed.
But there were a lot of women that I met who were assaulted in, you know, 1997, 1999, 2001. And it was pretty clear that they had been assaulted by a serial rapist. One woman in particular in Memphis, who was the person who said to me, you really have to ask yourself if rape is a crime. And, you know, there was a series of kidnappings by someone who was utterly terrifying and kept, and sorry if this is triggering to anybody, and I hope you know that this is the subject that we're talking about. But Memphis had a backlog of like 12,000 rape kits.
Mhm.
And these women all reported their rapes, and because it was the kind of situation where it's more likely that somebody would report, and several more people were assaulted, and which is why these particular women are suing the city. Several more people were assaulted as a result of them not investigating. And so calling it a backlog implies that, yeah, that they meant to
Criminal
do it.
negligence. Yeah,
Yeah, it's horrifying.
yeah, it's horrifying.
They meant to do it, but if they just had more money, and if they just had more police, and if they just had more resources, everything would be better. And that doesn't even get to, the fact that when some cases come in, they're called unfounded before there's even an investigation that's done at all.
Which is why it's so hard for people to come forward, because you invest so much time and hope and physical discomfort just going through that process, and then to have it not actually produce any resolution. So after reading your book, I felt so close to you. And actually, I was on the phone with you earlier. I'm like, I feel so close to you. But of course, I feel close to the Michelle that is presented on the page, the Michelle I got to know. And when we teach memoir, we often talk about the need to separate the character self, who the story happens to, from the narrator self who tells the story, who it's, themselves is a construct. And they say that trauma, splinters the self. And you write movingly about how you would kind of disassociate in moments and move sort of outside of yourself as a way of coping. And I was wondering if that experience sort of made it easier for you to write, separating who you are now from who you are then, and doing that work.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I would say that one of the most helpful things about the memoir class that I took, and sort of that concept, Alicia, is that whenever we had our books workshopped, we always talked about the character so-and-so. And also if somebody would forget to do that and ask a question like, I don't see why you did this. I mean, shouldn't you have realized blah, blah, blah? The instructor would say, Alex Marzano-Lesnevich would say, you mean the character Michelle, and you're talking about what's on the page. And it was, if you're going to write about memoir, you really have to have an instructor, which Alicia is like this, who respects boundaries and takes responsibility for making the classroom a safe place. Because writing is the essence of vulnerability anyway. And I think when you're writing memoir, it's sometimes hard to separate out sort of what's on the page and what's feels like it's about your personal life. And that really made a difference to me. And although I tried my absolute hardest to that there's nothing in the book that I would say I exaggerated or changed in any way. I was as true to my memory as I absolutely could be. I still feel like it's narrative nonfiction, which is like the best you can do, because what's there is what you chose to put there, and what you left out is also, what you chose to leave out. It doesn't tell the whole story, or nobody could read 35 years of my life.
It wouldn't make a book. It wouldn't even make an interesting telephone book. At least even a telephone book has some order to it.
That's right.
So another sort of craft question while we're talking about it, Linda Cutting asks, how did you decide to write about the rape in the present tense and then the rest in the past tense? And also, I imagine, maybe you can comment on this too, like how hard it was and what it stirred up to do that, and how you sort of took care of yourself in that process.
Yeah, so that was something that also Alex Marzano-Lesnevich helped me with. I think we were reading some book that had some present tense. We were talking about trauma in the present tense. And I tried writing one section in the present tense, and I found it much more chilling and much more vivid. And I decided that it was important for the reader, if I was going to be talking about, I made a lot of changes all the way through as the editing process occurred. And I just decided that I had to write about what happened. I couldn't pretend, I couldn't shy away from it if I really wanted people to understand the juxtaposition of what rape victims really go through, not what the myth is, but what they really go through versus the non-response by law enforcement. And so it was a little more daunting to put it in present tense, but I hope it was effective. Yeah.
Related to how law enforcement responded, Linda Odom asked, the rape kit backlogs, would you name it misogyny? Like, would you call it misogyny?
Yeah, I would. I think that what I say in the book is that I don't think it's accidental that this is a crime that overwhelmingly affects women, children, both boys and girls, people of color are victimized at higher rates. LGBTQ people are also victimized at higher rates. And there's something I have in the book about how there's something on exonerations that talks about how much more likely men of color are to be convicted of sexual assault, even when innocent, and white perpetrators are more likely to be found innocent, even when guilty. And so it is a mess of a system. And, especially now in our country when we're reckoning with so many issues related to justice and equal protection under the law, it seemed like it was the right time for this book.
Absolutely.
But I would name it misogyny. I'm sorry, I would. And patriarchy, like when the people in power who are making the laws don't think that addressing this is an urgent issue, you have to ask yourself why.
Thank you. You've said in interviews that you don't want your life reduced to your rape, and yet rape is in the title of your book.
Yeah.
And you're in the midst of this book tour where something that you didn't want to share or chose not to share widely with people you work with, suddenly you're having to talk about over and over and over again and have associated with your name. Just wanted to ask, how hard is that for you? If you could comment on that.
It is sort of I can't think of the word. It's not a conundrum, but it's confounding, right? Because I did write the book and I did put rape in the title very intentionally. I guess I just decided that I couldn't shy away from it. I had a story I had to tell. And if you read the book, you will see that it is also full of we all have challenges. We all have things in our life that are really hard, that we do or don't share and let people know what we're struggling with. And I just decided that I needed to tell the story. I had the experience to tell it. I had the recovery to tell it. And I also had a great life. I have a great life. I have the best family and friends, and I feel really, really lucky. And so if I could tell the story and you could see me as not broken, I'm not. And, that could provide its own sense of hope, and that I could talk about it seriously without asking others to do the work, but to say, you can join me. It took me a while to feel ready to do it, but I'm ready now.
Mm. Yeah, I think what's interesting too is that this isn't like a book with a tidy resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And, The Guardian has called your book an invitation to dwell in the discomfort that rape stories cause us.
Yeah.
And this idea of your book is challenging of traditional rape narratives. I wonder if you could sort of talk about what has made it challenging and how intentional that was for you, and like what is the traditional rape story and how yours is resist that.
Yeah, I think that a traditional story has that arc that we were all taught, that, you know, somebody is crushed by something so unimaginable, and, you know, in some ways it's the beginning of my story. It's like, and then somehow you persevere and you overcome, and it really is put away. You have healed, you have recovered, and it's no longer this big part of your life, and you have prevailed. I think that's one, maybe that's a fiction story. And in my book, I do think that there's some complex layers where I can say that my life is fantastic, and that I wish this didn't sit with me every day.
Yeah.
I can say my life is wonderful and I wish this never happened.
Your book also,
yeah.
Sorry, your
Okay.
book also challenges the other kind of familiar rape narrative, which is that comes out of watching episodes of Law and Order SVU,
Right.
which even, you know, as someone who is part of the situation, you could come in and have these expectations of, like, you know, on Law and Order SVU, the police take it seriously. They can solve that crime in an hour, you know, but like,
that's right.
They, you know, they work with the, you know, they negotiate, and like, you had to, in a way, let go of that received narrative.
Yeah. And in fact, you know, I won't give away the ending, but I will say that there is a moment where I actually think my case has been solved after giving up hope. I will say that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I pursued it, perhaps I could have pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to see if this person who had just come out of jail after 20 years actually was the perpetrator that we had been looking for. And at a certain point, I do sort of say, that's not where I want to spend my time. This is what's hurting me, not what happened to me. And so I go a different way, and that's to speak out and to write the book and to ask other people to look more critically at crimes of rape and to hold law enforcement accountable to a standard that we deserve. And you're right. I think that show does a real, I mean, I know a lot of people like it, and it's sort of a relief for some people to watch it, because there's like these great endings, and
They want justice. Yeah.
We want justice. We want justice. Yeah.
Yeah. But what does justice look like, and how do you define justice, and justice for whom? And
Exactly.
I want to remind folks to that this book is Rape the Crime, which is a fantastic book, is available for purchase. The link is in the chat. And also, please, if you have questions, you can post them in the Q&A, and I will ask them. So I wanted actually to talk about the role of your wife and children in the book. You know, there were these really intimate, joyful moments, but it really made me think about how we can take care of ourselves through taking care of others.
Yeah.
And also letting others take care of us. And I just wondered if you could talk about your decision to include your wife and kids in the book, and, you know, why that was important for you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't read, like, I didn't say, can I read you every single thing I'm going to write about you, and ask you if that's okay. But I trusted myself enough, and I love them so much that I trusted that they would really, that they would know that this was my lens. And I couldn't not include them, because they're sort of everything to me. And I felt like they lived a life with me. And even that issue of how you know when it's time to tell your kids about things that are so hard that you live with. And, you know, I think if you asked both of them, although I never wanted to ask them because I think I felt shame, can you tell that I'm having a little bit of a hard time, or that, you know, especially right after this surgery, when I was like a nervous wreck, I had this, you know, resurgence of PTSD, or PTS, we'll call it. And and when they were grown and young adults, I felt like I could include little snippets that were important, like their birth, and how supportive they were when I did go to Washington, D.C. in the Department of Justice, and my daughter's reaction to trying to help me learn how to swim because she couldn't figure out how. Thank you.
Because you didn't know how to swim, and she was like, I'll help you, and she
Yeah.
wanted to teach you. So she, in a
Yeah.
way, she wanted to take care of that vulnerable side of you.
She did, and she somehow made this connection. She was young at the time, and she wanted to make this connection that how could you ever be afraid of anything ever again if you went through that? But you're really afraid to swim, so let's deal with the swimming first. And we had the most tender time together trying to have me learn, which, P.S. everybody, I still don't know how to, I don't think I'm going to learn, but we tried, and it was a really special thing.
Another family scene that really moved me in the book was one with your mother. And, and I've been thinking since you've been longlisted for the National Book Award, how wonderful it would be for you to share that honor with your mother, who you lost 10 years ago, and your dad, who you lost when you were just a girl. But you have this fight where you're angry at your mother for not coming out to Boston to see you after the rape. I guess, was she living in Chicago then?
Ohio, but yes, Midwest, yeah.
Yeah, but then you had told her not to come.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, I'm a mother of a daughter myself, and I could relate to the both of you.
Yeah.
And then I was wondering, like, if my daughter was attacked and then asked me not to come, what would I do? Do you honor the wish, or do you come anyway? So, like, I wonder if you could just talk about that fight, and how do you wish that was handled differently?
Yeah, I think that I don't actually, now that in retrospect, I feel like, I wasn't really in my right mind. And I had this irrational feeling like I can't take care of my mother, and she loves me so much that she's going to be so distraught that to have her around me would be intolerable, because she would be so sad and so worried. And I couldn't see that she would then also maybe be able to take care of me. And so she respected my wishes and didn't come, partially because she sought expert advice from a rape crisis center, and they said, one of the things that rape victims need is to have control. So even if this sounds really wacky and horrible and against everything you want to do, you should give her some time. And, I also think that you're sometimes angriest at the people who you feel the safest with. So at the time, I really thought I was really, really, really angry at her, but I also really loved her. And so I think that both things can be true. People have asked me, what would you recommend somebody does who is struggling with that if somebody, a loved one, says that they don't want you to come? And I said, well, maybe what I would do, I said, maybe I would stay in a city nearby, and I would say, hey, I'm just down the road, and if you just need me to come, if you don't want to see me, that's fine, but I just happen to be at this hotel nearby. And also to remember too that when people are traumatized, they aren't necessarily thinking all that clearly, and it's important to ask again. So I knew I was going to see my mother a couple of months later, so I sort of pushed it off to that, like, I'll see you in August, which was 2 months away.
But you were angry.
Yeah, I was, yeah. And but I do have to say that I have thought a lot about her and my dad and my Aunt Marlene, who I was really, really close to, who just died recently, a couple of years ago. And I do think about what this would be like for them to, see this book come to fruition. And so I appreciate you mentioning that.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the side effects of trauma that I thought your book really powerfully illustrates is how it can sort of derail or interrupt a life. And that, some of the grief that's experienced might be grief for the former self, like the self before trauma. And so you'd studied English at Brandeis, you had a job at a magazine, a job that you loved. And then after the rape, you had to leave that job. And then your career took this sharp turn into public health. I wonder if you could comment on that. And also, does writing and publishing this book feel like a creative homecoming for you?
Yeah, it really, really does. It really does. And if I have a picture. It's actually on my video screen. I have it on my website. I have a picture of me at around the age that I was when I was attacked, and that person was fearless. Like, she was fearless and thought that, you know, she was going to be part of changing the world. And you know, I felt like she actually died that night. Like, she died, she was gone. And now, and I've been feeling more like, since I've been writing and since I've been, since the book came out, I actually feel like she's, you know, it might sound strange to people, but it's like she's popping up and she's present, but it also feels like she's inside of me. Like that reintegration has really occurred. And sometimes when I've been doing these talks, I experience myself as having a confidence that feels new, but it also feels really old.
Mm-hmm.
And
like you're like, oh, this is a familiar feeling. I
yeah,
used to know this girl. This used to be me.
Yeah, it used to be me, and it feels like it's me again. And you know, I think about how much I missed her.
Yeah.
You know, she was a lot of fun, and I think that when you push a part of yourself aside like that, it's not really gone. It's sort of like, you know, in a little box, sort of shouting, like, you know, let me out of here. And it feels really, really, it feels great.
Yeah. At 59, publishing a first book, getting a National Book Award long list.
Yeah.
So and I want to just remind people, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And also, if you're interested in buying Is Rape a Crime, there's a link in the chat as well. So one of the epigraphs that opens your memoir is from poet Emily Dickinson. She writes, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul."
Yeah.
Big sigh. And I just wondered why you chose that quote and what the role hope plays in your story.
So I have this long quote by Judith Herman right before the epigraph from Emily Dickinson, where it's talking about how atrocities, like some atrocities feel too terrible to mention, and you have to name them, because if you don't name them, you'll, you know, and it goes on, and it's very heavy. And then it says, hope is the thing that with feathers that perches in the soul. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what I tried to do in the book. Like, here is this horrible thing, and here is its devastation, and here is a life, and here is a way forward. And, you know, even in this present time when, like, our world is so challenging
right now.
Yeah, it's really hard to come by.
Sustain. It's the bird that perches and flies away, and you're chasing it.
And you're sort of like, can you have hope? And I feel that in this moment. I really do. And every time I feel like I hear somebody talking about how devastated they are, and they are, and we are, at what's going on in our country, I have learned that if I give up on hope, I feel despair, and I just can't. And so I find a way to believe in the goodness of people, or to believe that, you know, what's attributed to, I think Martin Luther King is, you know, that the arc of justice is long, but you know, it takes a long time, but we arc towards justice. And I guess I have to believe that, like, whether I'm right or wrong, I have to believe that. And I do believe in hope.
Yeah.
I believe in hope and love and joy.
We have a final question. This is from April Duggar. What advice would you give to a young woman who has not yet found her voice to speak about her rape?
To trust yourself and be on your own timeline and choose wisely. And what I mean by that is that you would be surprised that you can pick one person to talk to. You can wait. You can talk to yourself. You can write. You could talk to a stranger. You could talk to a therapist, and give yourself time. That it's really, it's hard to trust yourself when you're feeling so shaken, but there are people out there who have also experienced this, and there's no right way and there's no wrong way, and there's no rush. There's no rush. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, just knowing that this event happened to you in 1984 and you're here speaking about it with so much wisdom and intelligence and strength and power is itself a testament. Thank you so much, Michelle. This was a really moving conversation. I really feel honored to have been able to enjoy it. And thank you, Magic City Books, for giving us this platform. Please purchase copies of Is Rape a Crime? Support your local bookstore. Magic City Books is continuing to do events through all of this, and we're all the better for it. And look, you know, don't let go of hope. I just find that such a powerful image of the bird there, and that we can still hold on to that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alicia. You're wonderful. And Magic City Books. And by the way, everybody, if you don't follow Magic City on Instagram, they have an incredible lineup in October, and they just are a lot of fun. So a shout out to them. And Alicia, really, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening, and have a great night.
Yay. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.